Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, Iowa Catholic Radio in Des Moines, Iowa, at the convergence of two rivers and really the universe itself, Bud. We were happy, everyone listening to the show, whether you're listening live on Iowa Catholic Radio, if you're listening on iowacatholicradio.com or the Iowa Catholic Radio app, and of course people who listen to us on podcast, welcome to the show. I'm Bo Bonner, where I work over at Mercy College of Health Sciences, and I am the Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives and the Director of the Center for Human Flourishing. Bud, what do you do over at Mercy?
I'm the Associate Provost at Mercy College of Health Sciences, and it's an exciting time of year to be in that role because we mentioned the inauguration of our fourth president, Dr. Adrian Henry, last week. This week it's been commencement ceremonies, so we get to send off a new crop of graduates. We had a pinning ceremony for the nursing faculty, and then Friday a big shindig of sorts to celebrate the students graduating.
And so we'll have summer starting before you know it. We want to thank Mercy College of Health Sciences for underwriting our show. MCHS.edu.
That sounds right to me.
That's end of the semester foibles there. MCHS.edu. I think there might be sometime a few people to throw in for summer, but the big one, of course, Bud, is this summer we're already recruiting. It's like football season. We're recruiting for the fall, so people should go check out the programs available, mchs.edu. Once again, Mercy College, thank you for underwriting the show.
Our admissions team this past spring did do a signing day, sort of in the vein of college football recruiting. That was fun. It's just, drop some confetti, have some of the new students sign their paperwork, and so we try to turn everything into a celebration, basically.
That's right. I mean, I don't know, when I started making the new students run drill. No, I didn't. Yeah. That would be great. That was like, go do layups. I'm confusing the sports. Catch ground balls, shoot some free throws. They're like, which one is it?
Maybe there's a market for there's the Rivals website for this, this guy's a 4-star and he runs like a 4A 40-yard dash. We should do that for students.
Well, I got to be honest. I don't know if there's an official remark on this, but anybody who was part of the proceedings of the inauguration saw that we do have a mascot. So the Mercy Guardians, chosen by the students. So, keeping watch over our health, things like this, mchs.edu.
I'm pretty happy with how the mascot turned out. It's funny, like in communities, I found this when I was doing like youth ministry and things. It's not in today's world very often like these Christological doctrines that will divide churches. It's the color of the carpet or the design of the new fellowship hall.
Right.
And so with the mascot at school, there were some passionate opinions on what mascot we should go with and the design of the new mascot, the Guardians. But I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I didn't ask your opinion before we got live here on air, so
I went for the Fighting Mercies, but no one listened to me. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
I've heard the mascot is swanky. It's got air conditioning or something. So I've agreed to serve as the mascot if they'll pay me.
If you have some conditions. Yeah. Well, you can do, well, speaking of, it's just mascot heavy. You fans out at Nebraska think you have a new day dawning because of a return-ish in style with your new mascot.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're living in an era of nostalgia in Nebraska athletics because there's not a lot of wins to spread around outside of volleyball and wrestling. But so, I mean, we're constantly wrestling with the glories of the past. But I think this is a good decision. So in the early 2000s with Herbie Husker, who traditionally had been an homage to our agricultural history and things, he's sort of he had the cowboy hat and he was chewing on a piece of straw and things like this. They went for a modernized Herbie. And, frankly, he looked more like a frat boy or maybe an insurance agent who was entering a super Walmart or something. And, I like insurance agents. I'm friends with some insurance agents, but it was a departure, a pretty dramatic departure from the history. So we're going back to classic Herbie.
Well, we're going back to classic Uncommon
show
Good.
Guest.
Yeah, we're having a show guest. He's been on before.
Yeah, Father Carter Griffin, and he forms and trains priests out in Washington, D.C. as part of the Archdiocese out there. We've had him on the show before. His new book is great. It's called Forming Fathers, Seminary Wisdom for Every Priest. But I've been reading this book in preparation for the show, and I think all of our listeners, regardless of your station in life, are going to get a lot from this interview. So, Father Carter Griffin today.
This is the Uncommon Good. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for all of our listeners, whether you're listening live on Iowa Catholic Radio, listening on iowacatholicradio.com or the Iowa Catholic Radio app. And, of course, for all of our faithful podcast listeners, we're happy to have you with us. Speaking of having someone with us, Bud, if you don't mind introducing our guest.
Yeah, as our guest today, we have a recurring guest, someone who's been with us before, Father Carter Griffin. He's presently a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington, but some varied experience, graduate of Princeton University and a former line officer in the United States Navy. He's written a few books, including one on why celibacy, Cross-Examined, Catholic Responses to the World's Question. His recent offering is Forming Fathers, Seminary Wisdom for Every Priest, and it's out by Emmaus Road Publisher. Father, thank you for being with us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Father, the goal, right, is everyone that listens today becomes a priest, correct? No, I'm joking.
Vocations will be booming.
That's right. And the second coming will be very soon.
No, just real quick, Father, beyond the fact of this is, for anyone listening and you go, hey, do you have someone you think might be interested in imagining a vocation and thinking about the priesthood? Obviously a go-to book for that. But, I'm just wondering, there's all sorts of priests and not all of them write books about what it would be like to form young men in seminary. So, what brought you to say, I'm going to write this book, and then maybe what made you think, okay, I'm going to form it this way, and this might be the best way to get people who are interested thinking about the seminary?
Sure, and I would say that that's kind of one of the purposes. It would be something that could be put into the hands of a young man who's thinking about or discerning the priesthood. But to tell you the truth, it's kind of its first audience would be other priests, and the thinking is, I think this is kind of the thinking of the publishers when they encouraged me to put some of these talks into a book, is that for a lot of priests, and I suppose this is true for everybody, after 20 or 30 years in the trenches, you kind of need to kind of come up for air and maybe drink from the waters that were so refreshing to you at the beginning of your journey, and like going back to some of the lessons that you learned from the seminary, maybe put in a different way, in a different light. I mean, it's, things have changed in seminary formation. I think we've learned an awful lot about what makes priests tick and what can help them avoid, pitfalls and things like that. And so a lot of that stuff is in this book now. And it could be helpful, I think, for any priest to kind of go. So that's kind of an initial. But then, the original thought actually was that all of these talks would be sort of modified and changed and make them just about human fathers in general, natural and spiritual. And I started to look at that, and I just sort of saw it to be it would make them something other than what they were, and that would be an interesting book too. And maybe down the road I'd have time to work on something like that. But this is really. It's going to be for priests and for seminarians. But having said that, it was also going to be hopefully something that's 85 or 90% of it is probably very similar to natural fathers and what they are going through. It sort of has to be translated. I was just talking to a friend the other day. He's got a few children, and he had some questions about. He came in and he talked about humility and one other topic, and so I just sent him a couple of the chapters to this book. I said, this might be helpful for you. It ended up being, he said, I found this stuff to be incredibly relevant for my life as a father and as a husband. And so he ordered the book, and then he told all his friends to get it. And that wasn't the point of me giving him the chapters, but the point is that I think there's something helpful there that a lot of people, there's stuff that's happening in the seminary that can be very helpful for people outside the seminary. I guess that's the bottom line.
Father, right before COVID hit, I actually had the privilege of visiting St. John Paul II Seminary, and it was a great experience. I was genuinely impressed by the quality of the seminarians there. We have a lot of parents and friends, of course, who listen to the show here in Des Moines. And as a father,
tons of friends.
They're coming out of the woodwork. As the father of three sons, what advice would you give parents in terms of encouraging their children to think about religious vocations? Or do you see patterns in the experience of the students who land at your seminary?
Sure. Yeah. No. And I would just like to affirm that. the quality of men, because I think a lot of folks don't really realize, I think they read terrible articles about way seminaries, at least what they, were maybe at one time, and I wasn't around back then 30, 40 years ago, whatever, and I think they just imagine that seminaries are kind of still the same. They're a completely different animal. If those things are true, again, I wasn't there, but all I can say is that it's a great time to be in seminary formation. It's either as a seminarian or as a person forming them, because they're really fine young men. They're coming from excellent families. They're committed. I mean, there's absolutely no sense of kind of trying to, fashion the church into my own being. They're just coming and they love the church. They want to serve the church. They have the struggles. I mean, everyone has struggles, and they have the struggles of their generation. They can be a little entitled sometimes, and they can be a little self-focused and stuff. And, but they've got enormous goodwill and prayerful. And so the quality of young men coming forward, I just want to say, people are out there wondering, gee, what's the future look like? All you have to do is go to a Catholic seminary, at least in the States. I can't really speak too much about outside, but at least in the States, and almost any seminary here, and you'll see that the future is very bright. I would say for the families, a couple of things that are consistent or pretty consistent. One of them is that there was an environment that fostered an excitement about vocation. In other words, if vocation wasn't kind of this heavy thing of you got to find out what it was like this exciting thing of I wonder what I'm called to be, and it's going to be awesome, whatever it is, in marriage or religious life or the priesthood or whatever, that God has got this unbelievably cool plan for my life, and the parents somehow fostered that, and there was no sense of God, you do whatever God wants you to do, but I hope He wants you to do this. It really has to be as neutral and as open, as excited as the kids, from the parents' point of view. I think that's certainly one big thing. I think another one, obviously more obvious, would be of sort of embracing and beautiful living out of the faith, right? That the faith wasn't kind of this burden. It was something that meant a lot to the parents. They showed it, and especially the dad. I mean, you've heard all the numbers, I'm sure, but the dad's commitment to his faith is by far the single biggest sort of factor in whether the children continue in the faith after they leave home. And so the dad, especially, giving a good witness, a good example, and so I mean, I think there's things like that, and maybe also just kind of a sense of receiving some formation in virtue and in prayer. Oftentimes when a young guy comes to me and says, what can I do to discern if I'm supposed to enter the seminary or not? I said, well, the first thing to do is, start praying, maybe get to daily mass if you can, or at least a few times a week, and get someone to talk to about it. Get a good advisor, maybe a spiritual director, priest, or not a priest, but somebody that you can really open up your heart to, because I think a lot of young people feel like they have to do this kind of all on their own, and that's just not a healthy. That's just not really a healthy approach to it. Somebody you can trust, that you can really open your heart to, can do wonders for a young person discerning.
It's been interesting for me to watch my children grow up in the faith, because I became Catholic in my late 20s, and I was already married with a child. So I never discerned, of course, a priestly or religious vocation. And I don't want to get too much into my history, but St. Augustine's prayer, Lord, give me chastity, but not yet. At one point in my life, I could identify with St. Augustine, and I think for most people, especially growing up in our culture, that's a struggle to achieve sanctity. You have a whole chapter on this, and I think some of the guidance that you give seminarians, could be helpful for any person. Could you talk about some of the formation that goes there to help, seminarians achieve freedom in their lives?
Yeah, I would say that certainly is one of the. In fact, it's the only thing that has two chapters of the book. I actually couldn't fit it in one chapter. So first of all, to fall in love with the virtue of chastity, right? Chastity is not just a whole bunch of stuff that you can't do, right? The chastity is a virtue, and a virtue means a power. And the power, it's not the power to avoid sin. That's continence or willpower. Maybe it's a good starting point. But chastity is the power to love well. And who doesn't want to love well? That's what we're made to do. We're made to love, and chastity is a virtue that helps us to do that. And so the first thing is fall in love with the beauty of chastity. The example, the scripture sort of metaphor that I use in those chapters is the Gerasene demoniac. He's out there and he's wandering among the tombs. He's like a dead man. And he's slashing himself with stones, and he's hurting, and he's crying out in pain, and he's sad. and he's naked, and Jesus comes and heals him. And then by the end, the people are coming, and there he is. And the scriptures say he's clothed and in his right mind, and he's sitting there at peace at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. Like that to me is like the image of chastity versus the image of being trapped in vice, and in impurity and whatever that looks like in one's life. So I think falling in love with a virtue and knowing what it is and knowing that it's possible to live it, I think is hugely important. And then I think it has to become very concrete, right? It can't be just like a nice idea. It really has to be like, these are ways, and I go through a bunch of different like natural and supernatural kind of tools, and I mean, all kinds of things, everything from a balanced life and getting enough sleep and having a good diet, and having good friendships, having sincerity, being sincere starting with God and with yourself, with your friends, spiritual director, being smart with devices, all these different things, accountability, partners, there's all kinds of natural things we can do, but then there's a supernatural, being close to Our Lady, fostering an intense prayer life, having some mortification, some self-denials every day, having spiritual exercises, spiritual reading, rosary, so forth. So, and others. So the idea is that it's neither one or the other. Either people try to kind of like, well, I'll just attack this thing and, read enough books on it and kind of deal with it at the natural plane. Or everything's going to be supernatural. If I just pray enough, then it'll eventually go away. And both of them are, without the other, is kind of either useless or worse than useless. It may even cause discouragement and despair. But with both and that confidence that Jesus wants to help us grow in this incredibly beautiful virtue, it's totally possible. And I've seen amazing changes, even in young guys who, now they're not, this would be before they come to the seminary. Like if somebody's really trapped in cycles of addiction and stuff, they're not ready for the seminary yet. But still, I mean, just to see the miracles are happening out there, and this is very possible. And if anybody's listening and wondering, gosh, it's been years and years and years, I'm never gonna break this. Just know that that's a lie from the evil one. He wants you to believe. He wants you to believe, and he's going to incriminate you and try to, whisper the worst things about you into your ear. But all of it's a lie. Jesus wants to do this, and he can, and he will.
So, Father, one of the things that seems to me, I'm like Bud too. Bud and I were at Protestant seminary, but I don't want to say anything mean about our Protestant brethren, but it's a lot different. I'll just put it that way. So, in precisely this way, it's got to be hard for a young man to imagine being a symbol the rest of their life. I mean, of course, we all are, right? Like, fathers are symbolic heads of their family, mothers are symbolic of the low. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that if you get down to it and you talk to, people on the street, you can quickly show, like, actually your life, just in living it, speaks a lot larger than you're letting on. Or, people understand, like, I'm part of a team, things like this.
Yeah.
But with priesthood, there's a specific way in which you are chosen among people to specifically live as a symbol the rest of your life, just every waking moment. You don't even like take it on and off in some ways, like if I'm the quarterback, So how do you even begin? I mean, you can tell someone that, right? But to your mind, what is a way that you can make someone, like, make that transformation where they can do something with that, right? And live into that. To me, that's a fascinating as a convert, that's a fascinating concept that really was never laid out as an option. Like Bud said, by the time I became Catholic, I was married. We had a kid. To me, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating and hard. I mean, it's hard to always be sort of, you're under kind of a microscope pretty much all the time. I remember a priest friend of mine, he was organizing a talk that Jim Caviezel, this is shortly after The Passion of the Christ came out, and Jim Caviezel played Jesus. And so he goes to pick him up at, I think it's a Grand Central, but anyway, Caviezel comes out, gets in his car, he's like, hey, Father, they meet. And then Caviezel's like, so Father, how do you do it? He's like, what are you talking about? He goes, how do you do it? Like, everyone knows me as Jesus now. I go into a restaurant and everyone's wondering how Jesus is going to tip,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, it's that sense of kind of, you're always under inspection, and it's true, and a priest is. I would say a couple of things about that. The first thing is, you're right. Increasingly, all Christians are going to come under the microscope, right? Because we're going to be more and more kind of radical and countercultural in a powerful and beautiful way. But everyone's going to be wondering how. I know this guy's a Catholic, and he goes to or he believes in that Jesus guy. I want to see how he behaves towards his employee. I want to see how he treats his wife. I want to see how he raises his kids, you know? So there's going to be a lot of that going on anyways. That's just kind of a general statement. I think another thing for the priest is that that is part of the package, right? I mean, that it's how Jesus set up his church. It's how the apostles were treated. It's how their successors were. And, you know, so he gives you the grace. If it's from him, then he's going to give you the grace to do it. But you need to be humanly prepared for it. And a lot of what happens in the seminary is not just stuff happening, you know, kind of whatever, within the four walls of the seminary and mass and adoration every day and all that stuff. It's also like what happens outside on campus when they're interacting with kids on campus. It happens in the summertime at their parish assignment. It happens at their apostolic assignment during the year, you know, serving the missionaries of charity, whatever it might be. And so all of these times, they are known as the seminarian. And, you know, so they're kind of getting used to that, and they're talking about it when they come back and what's hard about that. And then I think just the last thing I would say is this is one of the reasons why I do a lot of stuff on fraternity and priestly fraternity, which, by the way, is one of the things that's, you know, easily transferable, you know, to kind of a layman reading, and, you know, because I think there's a huge need for fraternity among Catholic laymen, and that will only grow. But anyway, going back to the priesthood, I think a priest needs to have priest friends, and because it's pretty much only with priest friends that you can really let your hair down and just kind of like say, this is really hard for me right now. And that's not obviously totally true. You're going to have family members, you're going to have, you know, friends from before you were in the seminary, stuff like that. But, you know, you have to be careful, and, you know, who you kind of unload on, or not unload, but who you kind of just open your heart to. And to have some priest friends in your life will be really important, because, like you said, there's a lot of, and you know, today with all the effects of the sex abuse crisis and everything like that, people are kind of looking at you with a jaundiced eye. And so to know that you can and should live up to the standards that you're expected to, but at the same time, you need to live authentically and truly who you are at all times, you know, so you're not living a double life, not pretending, but you also have a place where you can go and bring some struggles like everybody has.
Yeah, this probably shows that, like, the age of children I have and what we watch. When you said the seminarian, I was thinking of the Mandalorian. I'm like, yeah, we should just give him armor and stuff. And anyway, that's Bud has, I'm sure, a much more insightful academic question than that.
Well, when you were talking, Father, actually my mind was going to, under Pope Francis' pontificate, there's been a lot of conversation about clericalism, and rightly so. You know, like, I think any Catholic worth their salt wants to combat clericalism. But I feel like even in those conversations, there are sometimes misunderstandings. And one that I kind of see is like where we've got this temptation to kind of like try to make the laity more priestly, like in the sense of the sacramental priesthood, and sort of like make the priest more like the rest of the faithful or something, when there really is like a proper distinction, not only in functions, but even in like Bo was saying, like identity and symbolism. But like, as you talk to the seminarians about clericalism, like what sort of counsel do you give there? Or do you, my kind of thought around that, is that kind of tracking with some of what you've seen?
Yes. I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about clericalism. I'm not sure. I think that it means different things to different people. I think for some, clericalism is kind of code for people who actually believe in the structure of the church that Jesus left. You know? Right. So like that's not clericalism. I mean, we do believe that priests are set aside to do this work, and they're supposed to become. I mean, at Holy Thursday, they wash the feet of 12 people. I mean, this has to be like the image of the priest is one who is set aside to serve, right? And there has to be that sense of being a servant of the servants of God, you know, as you call the Pope. But that's what Christian authority is all about, right? If you want to be first, you have to be last, Jesus said. Right? He's not going to lord it over others like the pagans. It's true authority, but the word authority really means, you know, to make grow, right? And so it's this sense of he has authority, and we should respect that authority, right? The fourth commandment. I mean, piety. We have piety towards God and the things of God, and including civil leaders and all the rest. But I mean, certainly leaders in the church, and there should be a deep love and a respect and a veneration for our shepherds. But it's not one of it's not one like the pagans. It's not one where we put them up on a pedestal and, you know, and bow down before them. On the contrary, we have and I'll tell you, I have a profound sense that people know that I am there to serve them. And I find it sometimes hard, but beautiful, you know, and there's this expectation that of course you're going to show up when I need you to show up. And, you know, there's not like, there's a thing, you know, sometimes a thanks for coming, Father, you know, but it's there's a sense that you're supposed to come, you know, and they're right. So I think it's both and, right? It's both the respect and the veneration that is due piety, but at the same time, it's a profound sense that we need to be men who are formed to serve and not to lord it over others. Both can, I think, and should be a healthy tension in both the priest and in the people. And when one is lost, that's when you get into different forms of clericalism, because that's when you really are setting up the priest as almost like a different being, and that's obviously false. Or in an attempt to get rid of that exalted understanding or the kind of the mythical being, then everything gets leveled, and it's no longer the Catholic Church. So I think holding that tension, I think, is super important. And when that happens, something really fruitful and beautiful emerges.
This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We're speaking with Father Carter Griffin about his new book, Forming Fathers. We'll be back. Stick around. We'll return to the show right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. Bud, please reintroduce our guest.
Yeah, our guest today is Father Carter Griffin. He's a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington. He's recently published a book, Forming Fathers, Seminary Wisdom for Every Priest. And Father, I have to say, so I was looking in the title page here. The cover image is called Mass in a Connemara Cabin, 1883. It's a painting from the National Gallery of Ireland. But I think Bo must really like the cover because Bo's kind of on a warpath these days to try to remove pews from Catholic churches. He says pews are a Protestant innovation, so he really likes this image of some faithful assisting at Mass without pews.
Well, I guess Bud's outing me on this one. But yes, it's a very beautiful. People should get the book just for the cover alone, Father. How's that for advertisement?
I love that cover. I mean, it's always been a favorite picture of mine, and I was glad that they indulged me on that one.
Yeah. So, Father, there's a lot of great stuff here. I'm not even sure where to begin this second segment of the show, but what jumps out to me looking at some of the chapter titles and things, you have a whole chapter on beauty. And I think that might surprise folks, like, oh, yeah, in a book for a priest, there's a chapter on prayer and on discipleship, but why beauty?
Well, I think that we live in a very ugly world. It's not all ugly, and I don't want to sound like kind of a doomsayer or anything like that. I think there are certainly moments and places of beauty, but we have uglified our existence to a large extent, and I think in our physical surroundings, the kind of life that we live and the busyness and the noise in which we live, oftentimes our relationships can be pretty self-serving and ugly and kind of shallow and hurtful. And I think people are living in a lot of isolation and alienation. And I think one way in to kind of penetrate through that fog is beauty, right? It's one of the three, at least classically, one of the three, to say in the ancient world, I think Thomas did the true, the good, and the one, but Aristotle and Plato would say the true and the good and the beautiful, right, are the three irreducible goods in life. And so, we should pursue the truth, that is to say knowledge and forming our minds, having a well-formed intellect. We should pursue the good, that is to say good versus evil, and forming our will so that we can do what is good and avoid what is evil. But we also need to pursue beauty and have the form and the harmony and kind of that which sort of emerges out, that attracts us, that causes us to desire something. That can and should be formed in our lives. Priests are surrounded by a lot of ugliness too, because they often have to work with, hearing confessions of, people who want to unburden their sins. They're dealing with difficult family situations. They're kind of going to nursing homes and hospitals and seeing sickness and all. So I think a priest especially needs to fill his life with beauty. But I also think that that's kind of increasingly the case for all of us. And so finding concrete ways in our lives to do that is really important, both digitally and especially physically.
No, Father, your book, I love that it's set up as Bud was implying, that there's like sections that people can look at, and again, talking about seminarians, people who are thinking about seminary, but like you said, to throw this out to priests to sort of go back to that well of, the thing about seminary themselves and what that, planted deep within them. I was joking with Bud that the chapters were going to have the secret things like whether you're a priest that buys a dog or a plant, or like these are the 5 cars with the 2 colors you can choose. I've been in different dioceses and I've joked around about that. My favorite joke, though, I'm going to throw it out, is just like with professors, you can always tell when they became full professors because their clothes all look whatever year that was. So that like priests, you can always tell when they first became pastor, because it's like that their off-duty clothes are the same. The reason I'm joking around, of course, about that, because one of the things that I think connected what Bud was talking about with clericalism, which again is so many things to so many people, and one of them, I mean, I think sometimes people can be silly about that, like that sort of stuff, the trappings of what it means for, what are priests going to drive, things like this, is actually your chapter on magnanimity. Even among people who talk about virtue, they don't talk about this one quite as much. It's a difficult one because magnanimity, especially if you have only happened to read Aristotle's vision of it, can sound exactly like something like the great-souled man that sort of rubs it in above other people, things like this. I was very intrigued that you instead pointed to the fact of boredom. There's all sorts of theories about boredom, and so I don't want to get into the technicalities of Bo's theories about boredom. But if you don't mind, I think that is precisely something that speaks to people's misunderstanding of choosing young men to set apart, not for their own sake, but for the sake of not their greatness, but the greatness of grace, the greatness of God. Do you mind talking about that a bit too?
Sure. Yeah. It's right. So magnanimity is really kind of what the word means: a great soul, a greatness of soul, a largeness of heart. There's that sense of that somebody who is willing and able to put it all on the line, for something that he or she believes in. Magnanimity is definitely, it's certainly not pride. In fact, there's a kind of a deep humility in sort of putting it all on the line for something that you really believe in, and not expecting it just to kind of be given to you or handed to you, or not have to work hard for it or whatever. So I do think that it's maybe not the only answer, but I certainly think it's a part of the answer to the kind of listlessness, the sense of lukewarmness, the sense of malaise, melancholy, mediocrity, whatever kind of coloration you want to put to it, that is so common today, that sense that people are on a treadmill that they can't get off, that life has no purpose and meaning, there's nothing bold or exciting, or, and so they find all these kind of really, really inferior outlets, either in stupid games online or, whatever, or even worse things, or drugs, or whatever it might be, and something to just break up the monotony. And what the real, and that of course just leads to a kind of even deeper angst and despair, and looking for more, so it never works. But magnanimity is like this sense of kind of taking the bull by the horns and living a fuller life again. So that sense of the adventure, I think it's in that chapter where I talk about, kind of like the fairy tale has, it's the contours of the fairy tale that are the contours of reality, right? The reason why we love the fairy tale is not because it's kind of a sweet thing that, happily ever after, whatever, and, kind of going through the difficult things, the challenge and overcoming it. It's because that's kind of what real life is like. There are these challenges that are in our life, but we also have the grace to overcome. I'm going to get it wrong, but Chesterton said something like, it's not that, dragons are real. It's just that dragons can be defeated. That's what we learn from the fairy tale. And that's a part of truth that is probably best told in the fairy tale. So that sense of kind of entering into the adventure and finding kind of the extraordinary in the ordinary, is I think what, that's kind of the goal, I think, of that chapter, trying to help at least put that on the radar as like a beautiful aspiration. And it's not an easy virtue to kind of grow in. It's not like, whatever, the virtue of courage, and you just have to do courageous things until you have the virtue. Like, in some sense, it's similar, but it's kind of a little bit trickier, because it means that you have to kind of say yes to things you don't feel like saying yes to. It means having a different perspective on life. Kind of it's a frame. It's sort of a frame, reframing sort of your life. And a big part of this too connects to a different chapter, which is on supernatural outlook, which is essentially seeing the world through the eyes of faith. And that's always one of the first talks I give every year, because it's probably the one cited most by the guys, not because it's some awesome talk, but because it kind of it's a life-changing kind of way of thinking about our lives. When we start to see everything through the eyes of faith, then the adventure unfolds and opens up before us, and we overcome that boredom, and that despair that you're talking about.
Yeah, Father, when we think about the sorts of things that all Catholics struggle with, like on the first segment, we talked about chastity. And I feel like that's one of the most difficult, but it's one where like a lot of weekly mass goers are like, oh yeah, of course, like lust is something we should root out of our lives. You have a chapter on simplicity of life, and I feel like in some parishes, this is maybe like greed is an unspoken sin. It's like one that as Americans, we do sometimes skirt around and maybe don't confront head on. I thought it was interesting that it found its way into your book because I guess Bo mentioned that he and I were both in Protestant seminary. And like one thing that Bo gave up coming into the Catholic Church was like a nice United Methodist pension.
I do think of that.
But like we've got some priest friends and like for the most part, you all are not paid exorbitantly, but you still like, this is still something that you have to confront. And I think what the advice that you give to priests, again, is something that all of us can draw upon.
Sure. I think maybe some of the conclusions, I mean, are going to obviously be different. I mean, it's one of the upshots of celibacy, not one of the reasons, I don't think, or something, not a significant one, is that we don't have some of the responsibilities of the children and college. I mean, paying for, the second car and, the big mortgage and stuff like, I mean, these are all parts of a life, and there's certainly nothing wrong with a person in the world, wanting to earn enough money to provide well for his or her family, and so I think that's a very different kind of quality, but at the same time, some of the principles are the same. And I think, the principles really are, avoiding unnecessary, avoiding manufactured needs. I think that's a huge one. I think that companies, tech companies, car companies, other companies are really figuring out how to create needs in us. And so really being a kind of a witness against that, rejecting those, asking ourselves, being honest with ourselves, and maybe having mentors and confidants that we can do this with. And sometimes it'd be helpful to have somebody on the outside, kind of an objective person. And so I think trying to see what my actual needs are, I think certainly trying to focus on not wasting. That is to say, sometimes it's better to, get something nicer and more expensive at the beginning and take care of it than it is, to kind of do the thing which might appear to be more simple, which is the cheap thing that, or you don't take care of it. Right. And so having a focus on kind of the longer term and using our resources, well, I think certainly, generosity and tithing in some way is super important. I mean, I think that, it's not just a duty, scriptural duty and a Christian duty, but it also is an important part of kind of keeping money well ordered in our own lives. When we're able to kind of let it go like that, let it go for the needy, let it go for the church, let it go for whatever we want to support. There's a detachment that happens in us, and we retain a certain dominion over our use of money. And so I think those are certainly some things that, and to recognize that, again, like we were talking earlier about being a witness, and people are going to be watching. If you're driving every year you get in a new car, or or whatever it might be, you're showing in whatever way the kind of the ostentation or an unhealthy attachment to things. I mean, people are going to notice that, and they're going to, it's going to lower the tone, right? And so I think I have in that chapter somewhere that Samuel Johnson, seeing this like really fancy castle, he turned to his, Boswell, his friend, and he says, these are the sort of things that make it difficult to die, and like when you have that kind of wealth, it just holds our hearts to this earth in a way that no Christian should be prisoner in that way. So finding these different ways to remain free, to use our money well, and to give it generously, I think is true for all of us.
Well, Father, one of the things that I think you use well, you speak about the economy of a book, right? I like that you have recommendations at the back for people who are interested to read more. And, well, first of all, I saw Jorge Bernano's Diary of a Country Priest, and I'm all like, that is existentially hardcore to throw out for the young men to read. And it's one of my favorite books. I love Bernano. But and it was making me think of what Bud brought up, because he has this marvelous reflection on poverty in there and what that actually means, the poverty of spirit, even less than being like, what's in your bank account. So kudos to you for including Bernano. I will only lightly rebuke you, and just as an Oklahoman, is Stanley Rother, who's now blessed, he's from Oklahoma. Always throw that out to people about like if they're considering priests. But this is why I was bringing this up. Stanley Rother, of course, famously almost doesn't. He has to switch seminaries because he was doing so bad at Latin. He had to go to a different one and sort of catch up. But then, like through grace, somehow this kid from Oklahoma who could barely pass the Latin goes to Guatemala and somehow learns a Mayan language well enough to preach in it and then actually translate the New Testament. I think why I love bringing that story up is not simply to go like, look, if you trust in God, miraculous sort of things start to happen. I, of course, just like talking about Oklahomans as much as I can. But I think that is an interesting aspect that your book clearly shows a thread through, is that if a young man is willing to believe that for men it's impossible, but for God all things are possible, then God really can do things like make you speak in persona Christi. You can be that conduit for grace for people, and who knows what martyrdoms of love you'll be capable of doing down the road. So I think that's what connects, like you said, like having the supernatural aspect. But I think maybe sometimes for lay people, that's a problem, because we think of, oh, well, this kid, right, he prays a lot, or we always see him at youth group, or he seems like a real winning guy. He really should consider the priesthood. But I think we miss that part even ourselves. And I'm thinking about, like, if you were going to suggest thinking about the seminary to a child or to like a student you have, it's important for lay people to not imagine only the super dynamic people could possibly have a vocation, or the ones that like seem like they could, run a 2,000 person church. Do we look at possible seminarians and priests appropriately through the lens of the supernatural as well?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. It's a great point, and on a couple of on several levels. One is formation works. Like, a lot of things happen to a guy in formation. And I've seen over and over again. Like, there's just like beautiful turnarounds, kind of growth, human maturity, spiritual depth. It happens in, it's 6 to 7 years, of formation, and if they go to good seminaries, it's going to be an intense formation. And so the young man that you see off to the seminary is not going to be the same guy who gets ordained on the other end. There will be a tremendous amount of growth. But even despite that, you're right, there's still kind of the raw material, which in a sense doesn't change. And God wants to use all kinds of different raw material for his priests, because some priests are just going to be more effective than others in different kinds of environments. There are going to be plenty of priests who may seem like the superstar, but he just can't make any headway in certain kinds of parishes, and that's where this other priest can do great. And everyone has their kind of their place. And so not shortening God's arm in that regard, like just, there certainly needs to be a kind of a common sort of a humanly well enough form. There has to be enough of a spiritual depth there. And there are certain conditions that are across the board, and that would certainly apply to, the John Viannis, of the world, or those who struggle a little bit more in seminary and academics. And certainly that is not the most important part, the academics. Blessed Stanley Poser is a good example of that, but because he was a great priest, and he didn't do that well academically, even if he had a pretty decent mind. Some people just learn differently. Point is that I think not limiting God, and knowing that there's so many young men out there and young women who are called to religious life, that, you may not suspect, and you may sort of wonder, and I think just giving them the chance to consider these are supernatural vocations, which means that it's not on equal footing with the natural vocation of marriage, right? If somebody has the possibility of discerning priesthood, they kind of have to do that first, in the sense that you're not going to be like dating girls and stuff like that while you're sort of discerning, seminary the way you discern kind of graduate school or something like that. It needs to be a little bit more of a dedicated time set aside. And in a sense, the vocation, the discernment actually happens in the seminary. So being bold and encouraging young men and women to give God, this opportunity, if he wants to call them to one of these types of vocations, and to also give them the courage to know that, God is going to fill them with joy and with graces if they're faithful to whatever vocation God calls them to. I truly feel like I'm just such a blessed individual, and the priests that I know are extremely happy men, and, with all the challenges, even the challenges today, it's an amazing and a beautiful life. And so I think anyone who's thinking about it, if whether they are able to pick up this book or some other resource where they can kind of get a feel for what it might be like as a priest, I think it could be helpful. But above all, meet people, maybe try to get to a seminary and meet seminarians. And I think you'll be as impressed as I've been for the last 12 years in this work of the young men coming forward. So just an encouragement in that regard. And, God's plan is always better than ours, whatever it is. That's kind of the bottom line, I think.
Well, this has just been a wonderful conversation, Father. And like with all these great conversations, I was hoping we could get into liturgy and some other things, but it's been a full conversation. I've really appreciated it. Bo mentioned Blessed Stanley Rother. I have to give you kudos. I was really happy to see John Henry Newman listed as one of the saints who men can read about as they think about the priesthood. The book is published by Emmaus Road. Again, it's Forming Fathers, Seminary Wisdom for Every Priest. We're going to make sure that the local Catholic bookstore has this on their shelves, Father. But if folks want to learn more about your work or about what you're doing there in D.C., are there other places that they can turn online?
I don't really have much of an online presence, to tell you the truth. I'm kind of in more hidden work here in the seminary, but the seminary has its own website, and there's some nice stories of some of our seminarians and some of the pictures and things like that. And I think oftentimes that can make it a little bit more personal for people. And there was also a couple of interviews. There was a book Journey Home episode that I know that which kind of is my conversion story and stuff like that. So nice. If people are actually interested, it's not that interesting for me, but if it's interesting for someone else, maybe that would be a good place to go.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Father, and blessings on your work. We'll certainly be praying for you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you all.
This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. Bud, wonderful guest. I know that we've had him on before, but I thought that really hit the spot here, of course, in the after Easter season, but especially for anybody who might be coming off that Easter high, young men thinking about their future. I believe, well, all sorts of people, but definitely that subset thinking they really should take a look at Father Griffin's book and imbibe some of that wisdom.
Well, I mentioned it during the interview, but right before COVID hit, I was actually out at the seminary and was able to see firsthand what they're doing. I think for me, it was really reassuring and encouraging to see so many quality young men and the formation they're receiving there. So I think Father Griffin's on the front lines. He's a great spiritual advisor and really a great theologian. Like a lot of theologians, academic theologians, they get pulled into writing books that 15 people read or something, but he's really on the front lines. And so, yeah, I always love talking to him. A great interview, one of those easy interviews where it's like, yeah, we're going to fill an hour, and, he just gets going and has some great wisdom. I was hoping that we might have heard what car he drove and if he was a dog priest or a plant priest, but we kind of moved on. We had more important things to talk about. But I really do think sometimes that there's a class that they real quick, they're like, you get to choose, right? You're priest A through F, and, you have to buy things accordingly. Well, when I was out there, it was crazy because the Washington Nationals had this miraculous comeback in the MLB playoffs. So it's funny, the priest out there, like some of the priest professors, I only spent like 48 hours with them, but it's like this sports memory because they were going bonkers. It was a great game. I can't rehearse the details because it's not Cardinals baseball, so I was I was a spectator of watching those guys enjoy the Washington Nationals comeback. That sentence is very rare, so I'm glad that you got to share in that blink of time where the Nationals were actually making people happy. I know. That's why these guys were so excited. It was a unique moment. But other unique moments, if you want to join us each week in a unique moment or every day, you can pray with us. We pray the Rosary on air, 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. We also do the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at 2:55 in the afternoon. But we encourage you to download the Iowa Catholic Radio app where you can keep up with all of the news and events, things happening at Iowa Catholic Radio. You can donate there, but you can pray the Rosary anytime, anywhere using that app. If you go to iowacatholicradio.com as well, you can look at events and see things happening in the Diocese of Des Moines or in our listening area. So, for instance, May 12th, out at West Des Moines at noon at St. Francis of Assisi, we got the Man Up West Power Lunch with Deacon Matthew Hallbach. So I think people know who that is. If that's in your area and within your lunch plans, go check that out. May 18th, we have the Legacy Golf Club Iowa Catholic Golf Radio Classic. I'm guessing most people would have already have their foursomes and things figured out, but if maybe your friends are looking for a fourth person, and if you're maybe either good at golfing or driving the golf cart, reach out to your friends. June 16th, again out at St. Francis of Assisi in West Des Moines.
Rome Beneath the Surface with Deacon Omer Gutierrez, host of the Catholic Hour, with the Evangelium Institute. That's 7 p.m. June 24th at the Iowa State Capitol, we have the Iowa March for Life with Pulse Life Advocates. June 24th at the Horizon Event Center in Clive, they have Night Fire concerts presenting Jordan Feliz with special guest spoken. And then July 15th, at the Community Choice Credit Union Convention Center Ballroom, Walker Hayes presented by Fairway to benefit the Iowa Catholic Radio Foundation, with special guest George Burge and local favorite Josh Sinclair. Get advance tickets starting March 30th. Oh, well, that's already happened. You can get them. You can, general public, use code ICR10. And like I said, you can go online and check all of that out. As always, Bud, we want to point here at the end that this is a ministry that encompasses not just the people on the air, behind the boards, or behind the desks. It is you, listeners, as well. You make it possible through your prayers and your volunteering, but very much through your donation. So please consider donating to this ministry to make sure that it keeps going on. IowaCatholicRadio.com to donate, Iowa Catholic Radio app, or 515-223-1150, texting or calling. Bud, as always, wonderful show.
I'm always excited about those codes for concert tickets. You just feel like you've got classified information or something.
It's not uber classified because you can go to iowacatholicradio.com, but you can go check it out there.
Crack the code. We'll send you the special glasses.
Perfect. So for Bud and Bo, this is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.